Hi, so you may have heard that we just flipped a mayoral seat in Miami, Florida for the first time in 30 years. Eileen Higgins won her race against a Trumpy Republican. Nobody thought it was possible. She's also the first woman to be mayor in Miami ever. Not only that, we also shifted two other seats, one of which we won and one of which we lost in Florida, about 16 points to the left. And we also flipped a state Senate seat in Georgia that no one was expecting us to flip because it's a Trump plus 13 district. So, with all of this great news going on, you might think, well, we are made in the shade for the midterms. And while we do look really good for the midterms, there's also redistricting. And what is going to happen with the different states redistricting will also affect the impacts. One of the states that we don't yet know what they're going to do is Maryland. And so I decided to talk to Maryland Governor Wes Moore about what their state's plans are with redistricting. Watch the whole interview. It is really great. He's a promising guy, and I'll be curious to hear what you think about his political future. So please don't forget to follow, like, and comment below. Thanks. We are here with Maryland Governor Wes Moore. This is very exciting. I am so
I'm
glad you
so
reached out.
excited.
It's great to have you here. And as people will come in little waves, I want people to know one of our main goals here today is to get Governor Moore more subscriptions for his Substack. That is my goal, not yours. He didn't tell me that, but he has a Substack at I am Wes Moore. And I want people to subscribe. It's free. I think it's free. It looks free. Anyway,
It is free.
and he's got
It is
great
great.
articles in there. Scott this year. Hi, Scott. I want to start out by saying that my dad's name was also Wes, and there aren't that many Wes's in the world. So I've been very fond of your.
Look at that.
I love the name Wes. It's a great name.
I love that. It's a great name. And actually, so my grandfather was William Wesley. My father was William Wesley. And so I'm Wesley Watende Omari Moore. So technically, I'm not a third, but the Wesley is the thread that actually combines both my families.
Oh, that's really beautiful. That is really, really lovely. I love that. Oh, family name, even better. All right. Well, Governor Moore, we have you here for a short, fleeting amount of time, and I want to make the most of it. People are coming on again. We're going to ask you over and over again to please subscribe to Governor Moore's Substack because it's great, and I want more people reading it. He is at I am Wes Moore. Governor Moore, I know people want to talk about redistricting in Maryland, so I don't want to jump into that first, but I want to just put a booknote in that and say that we are going to return to redistricting.
Absolutely.
But first, let's talk about the state of affairs in Maryland right now. How did you all do during the shutdown? What was that like? The SNAP being cut off, all of the catastrophic, the job losses, the RIFs. What was it like? What was your response there?
It was horrific. There's no state that actually had a bigger impact in that than from all this than the state of Maryland. Because we have more federal employees than any other state. I have over 260,000 federal employees in my state. But even before the federal government shut down, Donald Trump had already fired over 15,000 Marylanders. And again, we're talking about people who were trying to make sure that our food is safe, and people who are trying to make sure that our planes are not colliding, and people who are trying to find the cures for cancers at the NIH. These were the people who they were choosing to go after first. And so the thing that I knew going into this though was that while Maryland was taking this on the chin like nobody else, I knew that my job in this moment was not just to push back on Trump. My job was to push forward, right? My job was to actually say, what are we doing to protect our folks and making sure that our folks are going to be okay in all this? And so during that same period of time, when the president of the United States was firing federal workers, I started something in Maryland called our Feds Eds, which was making sure that our federal workers who were fired or laid off could now find pathways into, for example, the education profession. And saying, if you were interested and qualified, we were going to get you certified, we were going to get you trained up, and we're going to get you into a classroom as quickly as possible to help address this teacher shortage. And what we have seen now is that during my time as governor, we've literally cut our teacher vacancy rate in half in the state of Maryland. And a portion of those have been from our Feds to Eds initiative. The same thing where we saw the private sector picking up, where since I've become the governor, we've added over 100,000 new jobs side of the state of Maryland, which, by the way, is more in 2.5 years than my predecessor added in 8 years. And so what we were able to do was just say, understand what's happening with the president of the United States and frankly, a lot of his lawless behavior. that's taken place. But we were going to make sure that we're going to use this moment to think differently, to protect our people. When the president was trying to cut SNAP, into our fiscal responsibility fund, which, by the way, is made up by capital gains taxes by those who are paying capital gains, and saying I took $62 million out of that to say that SNAP would not be interrupted for the people of my state. And so I'm really proud of the fact that despite all of this, that we've been creative, we've been aggressive, we've been thoughtful, and we make sure that our people are protected regardless of what the president of the United States is trying to do to us.
Was a really amazing opportunity, I think, during the shutdown to see the difference between Democratic governors on one hand and the Republican governors on the other. When there was that brief moment where some people were getting SNAP payments and a lot of people weren't, I did a poll of my followers, and it was almost without exception only people in blue states who got that SNAP funding back. And it was because governors like you figured it out. You figured out
Correct.
where you were going to get the funds and you just got it done. So that is amazing here. I mean, it is fundamental difference between the views of government, between Republicans and Democrats right now, especially, right? And what I hear you saying is that we're making lemonade. So you have all these fired federal workers. You got them into the educational profession, solving another problem while helping them. That's very amazing. And also this idea that like your Democratic governor there to help. Right?
And I don't know if it's mattered more who your governor is. And I think the thing that we've seen, frankly, from Democratic governors across the board has been a level of creativity to say that we're not just going to rail against what's wrong with Donald Trump, but also we're going to come up with creative ways of actually making sure the economic prospects of our people are pushed forward. When I ran for governor, I was very clear that we were creating work, wages, and wealth, right? Wages, wealth for all of our people. And since our administration has now come on board, we've been able to do things like take the unemployment rate and gone from 43rd in the country to now having amongst the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country by focusing on apprenticeship programs and trade programs and getting rid of this idea that every single high school and the way we're grading our high school should be based on how many students they're sending to four-year colleges, when that's not going to be the path for everybody. That it wasn't that I signed a mass pardon in the history of the United States of America when I pardoned over 175,000 misdemeanor cannabis convictions to get people back into the workforce, particularly because they were being punished for something that wasn't even illegal anymore. That we raised the minimum wage in the state of Maryland and making sure that people could be paid fairly for the work that they are doing. And we were able to address things like rising housing costs by actually signing executive orders to build more housing. That we're able to do things like making sure we can support our entrepreneurs and create more business aspects and prospects, particularly for our small businesses. And so when you're watching the president of the United States doing things like, we've seen our energy prices have gone 20% since Donald Trump has been the president of the United States, that we have seen restrictions on our small businesses, particularly our Black-owned businesses, and particularly on our women-owned businesses and veteran-owned businesses, that your governor is actually able to create new pathways of support. So I think it does matter who your governor is in this moment.
It really matters so much. I hear someone talk about all the creative ways you are working to make your state better at a moment when the federal government is unfortunately just wrecking things, literally and figuratively. It's really to hear. And this is why every single election,
Exactly.
who your governor is, it can literally make the difference between whether you have healthcare, whether you have food.
That's right.
As you said, it's really good to hear. So, and speaking of healthcare, let's talk a little bit about what I'm starting to call the health apocalypse. Health apocalypse. Combine those two words, it's not really working. But next year, I worry that we're in for a really rough ride. We have
That's right.
Medicaid work requirements coming in 2027, but we've got the ACA premium tax credits probably not getting extended. What are you planning for in next year to sort of buffer against all of these cuts?
Yeah, and I'm up too because it's not even just about next year. I mean, we've seen how $250 million from that bill that they passed in Washington means that $250 million were just cut from rural healthcare in Maryland. This is so devastating and so heartless. And I say this as someone who, this is also very for me because I watched my father die when I was 3 years old because he didn't get the healthcare he needed. And so healthcare has always been a very, very personal issue for me and that we are always going to fight for. But it's also something that I know that it does not seem to care or matter to this White House. And so we have just been very clear. We are going to do our part on a state level to be able to address it. Now I know, and every governor will tell you, that there is no state that has the balance sheet or the resources to make up when the federal government just says you're on your own. No state has that. But I do know this is that this year, for example, I signed legislation saying that we were going to come up with a state account to be able to add to the ACA subsidies. So when we knew that the ACA subsidies will be going away and people's health care will be jacked up, that we said we can, from a state level, be able to help at least support our people so they're not watching their premiums jump by 80 and 90 and 100%.
Yeah.
Like we are seeing in these states, that we actually, when the federal government was pulling away from rural healthcare, what did we do in Maryland? We made the largest investments in rural healthcare than we've made in generations. We are building a new hospital, a full service hospital inside of the Eastern Shore that's going to be able to serve 6 different counties inside of the Eastern Shore, that we built our first medical school in two medical schools. One that's taking place in Western Maryland, in rural Maryland. The other is going to be taking place at Morgan State University at one of Maryland's HBCUs. And so when we're talking behind, we mean that inside of the state of Maryland, and particularly when it comes to being able to address this issue of healthcare, because of the many, many deeply things that we're seeing from this federal government, their assault on people's health and their livelihood and their legacies is one of the most staggering.
It is staggering. I agree. Yeah, great. It's life, death. Really depends on
It's life or death.
Yeah.
And we had federal down that, when I was, seeing time, that wanted the government to be shut down, especially not anybody in Maryland, because we knew the implications of it. But I'm also very clear about this. A basic prerequisite of having the federal government open should not be kicking people off of healthcare.
Right.
That's not the job of the government.
Yeah. And then taking away their food and negotiate for taking away their health care.
Correct. While food was being used as a negotiating tool.
Yeah. No, it's really not. I'm for your loss with father. That is a horrifying story, and that'll shape a person. I'm to hear that. I saw a question in the comments, and I don't often get a chance to ask a governor a question like this, but you are the one who would know. We hear a lot of people saying, Democratic states are donor states. They're money into the federal government, then they're taking out. The federal government is lawless right now, being run by this, whatever you want to call him. We won't call names, but why can't we just withhold our federal tax dollars? I know that this is not a realistic proposition, but why exactly is it not realistic so that people can understand this?
Yeah. So it is true that Maryland is, some people call it a giver state.
Mm-hmm.
Maryland is where we end up giving more to the federal government when it comes to taxes than ends up receiving. And frankly, a lot of states that you'll see, and honestly, for Republican states, it's actually the other way around, where they're receiving more from the federal government than is received. One thing that I think about our economy is one of these places where we are focused on making sure we're having economic growth within our state, but also, frankly, we need to have economic diversification. When I talk about the fact I have more federal workers than any state inside this country, that is something we're very proud of, right? I'm proud of the fact that Maryland is the home of the NIH. I'm proud of the fact that Maryland is the home of Social Security. I'm proud of the fact that Maryland is the home of the NSA. I'm proud of the fact that Maryland is home of U.S. Cyber Command. I'm proud of the fact that so many federal institutions call Maryland home. And also that means for many people who work inside of these facilities, inside of these entities, that what they are Marylanders, right? So I have a deep pride in that and that integral relationship that we have between Maryland and our federal institutions. So is that when we are watching this assault that is taking place on our federal workers, when we're watching this assault that is taking place on Maryland, when you're watching the President of the United States saying things like, we're going to pull the FBI building from coming to the state of Maryland because Maryland is, quote unquote, a liberal state. We know that does require for us to think about what are we doing in our own state to making sure we're both diversifying our economy, but also making sure that we're growing regardless of what is happening from the federal government.
Okay. I still don't fully understand why we withhold our tax dollars, but I know we can't. I think it's just not realistic.
No, but I listen. I do think and ending and having this where people, a lot of us, that we're actually giving more to our federal government. I would love for it to be as simple as simply saying, well, we're just going to cancel our federal withholding. I trust me, for it to be, but I've also in many ways, it's not that simple. And frankly, ways I'm not going to let Donald Trump completely dissolve any form of federal responsibility or let get away with this idea of simply saying that the American experiment is Donald Trump said so.
That's a fair response. I think that's a fair response. That is true. I mean, if we're United States, we're United States through and thin. So that. But that was good. Thank you. I've been asked that a million times, and I don't really know how to answer it. So let's talk about redistricting, because y'all are in a situation right now where there's a lot of desire for Maryland to get in on the redistricting fight. Talk to me about where you are in that decision-making process right now.
Yeah. So, and frankly, they're in something that I'm happy that, I theory, I agree that decade, every state goes through their own redistricting process. And in theory, it generally what happens after the census. I also know I don't live in theoretical. I live in reality. And the reality of what's happening right now is Donald Trump is calling and picking and choosing which states should go through a mid-decade redistricting process and determine whether or not they have fair maps. That he's calling Texas, that he's calling Florida, that he's calling Ohio and calling Missouri and calling North Carolina. And ironically, I did not get a phone call. So when I saw all these other states who said we're going to go through a mid-decade process to determine whether or not they have fair maps, my point was this: I refuse to sit on my hands while we're watching Donald Trump determine what our democracy looks like.
Yeah.
And so I called a governor's redistricting advisory commission, which made up of both Democrats and Republicans, that is chaired by our senator, Senator Angela Alsobrooks, who's then going to the saying, let's listen to the people. Let's hear them out. And let's hear from people to determine whether or not we have fair maps or not. And the thing that we are seeing right now in the state of Maryland is that people are having their say. We are hearing their perspective. This is not happening like it is in other states where Texas is having closed door conversations with Sharpies to determine what their maps look like. My point is this: listen to the people. And the people will be speaking to our commission loud and clear, and they'll come back with their recommendations. The thing that I can tell the people of Maryland is this: we are going to have fair maps come next November. And we are going to make sure we do it. People were saying, well, it's a tradition that we do it at the end of the decade. I said, I understand you, but I ain't standing on tradition on this one.
Yeah.
We are going to make sure that the people's voice is heard. We are going to make sure that our maps are reflective of that. And we're going to make sure that Donald Trump is not going to determine what Maryland's democracy looks like. Marylanders will determine what Maryland's democracy looks like.
So what I hear you saying is you're going to have this commission, you're going to take the feedback of the people, and then they are going to make a recommendation to you. And then you will sort of make a recommendation to the powers that be that draw the maps. Is that correct?
That's right. So the commission is actually going to make recommendations to assembly. The way, each state is going to be different, where in Maryland, different than California, is different from New York, is different from Illinois. And the General Assembly have to be the ones to approve what happens when it comes to our congressional maps. And so the Redistricting Commission is completing their work now. They will make recommendations to the General Assembly. But I am very confident that not only are we standing on ground, we're standing on legal ground. Any assertion that somehow we could lose seats is not legally founded. Any assertion that somehow what this is doing, it's packing. It's not legally founded. That I decided to go through a redistricting commission that has both Democrats and Republicans, because I actually think this is the most thorough and thoughtful process that is taking place around the country. And so then the General Assembly will decide what we're going to do. But I feel confident that the General Assembly is going to make the bonus.
Okay. So that sounds like I hear what you're saying there. It's great that the people are getting a chance. I mean, here in California, we got a chance.
That's right.
To vote. The people came. They made their voices extremely clear. And in Indiana, the same thing. The people have come. In Ohio, and they have let the lawmakers know how they feel. It's just that the lawmakers are not listening.
They're not listening.
No.
And listen, and I want to be very clear that, the way democracy works, if lawmakers don't listen to you, they have to be moved out.
I 100% agree. Vote them out. 100%. Okay, so, thank you for that. And then one last thing before we go. Our city right now here in Los Angeles is seeing more ICE raids than we have ever seen. We got in the news a lot months ago, but actually it's worse now. Yep. We are seeing detention centers with vicious child abuse, sexual abuse, heinous human rights, Alligator Alcatraz, quote unquote, I hate that name, but that is opened again. And what is happening there is a travesty. Amnesty International is calling it torture. What actions are you taking in your state to protect the people of Maryland from ICE? And how are you standing up to the Trump administration on this?
Yeah. I mean, uh this is so barbaric what we are seeing. This is a very personal where, an immigrant family. I was raised by mother. I remember I had a conversation with my mother, talking about she was, wanted to go back to Jamaica and to go see family, and was saying like, but do you think it's okay for me to leave?
Yeah.
Do you, they'll let me back in? Like the level of barbarism that we're seeing, is staggering. And we do need to make sure that we have that we need immigration reform. And frankly, there is no state reform that has to come from Congress. And Congress has just been completely asleep at the wheel, in the fact that we do not have a holistic reform policy that's on board. So frankly, for all of us governors, we deal with the consequences of a broken policy, but we don't necessarily, we're not in charge of it. But I am clear on that. I agree that we need to make sure that we are dealing with violent, with violent criminals and violent offenders. I also agree that we're following the Constitution. But the problem is ICE is doing neither.
Yeah.
They're not focusing on the most violent offenders.
No.
And they're not following the Constitution. And so while we will follow the Constitution here in the state of Maryland, I am also very clear for those who are not following the Constitution inside of our state, there has to be accountability for that. And so we do work with federal authorities when it comes to offenders out of our communities and out of our neighborhoods. We have seen how Maryland has had amongst the fastest drop in violent crime anywhere in the United States of America over the past 2.5 years. So we know they commit a violent crime in our state, they will be held to account. And you know who knows that most? The people committing violent crimes. They know we have no tolerance, no patience for that in our state. However, when you're going after communities, when you have parents who are afraid to pick up their children from school because they heard that ICE might be in the area, and these are parents who are here legally, like this is the type of thing that just goes and continues to show the of inhumanity that this administration continues to lead on in these exercises. Our state, we are going to be very clear. We deal with the issue of violence within our state, but we follow the Constitution. And we work with those who are following the Constitution. And unfortunately, what we are seeing from so many of these folks from ICE, that is not what they are doing. And they're not what they're doing around the country right now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, not at all. And I think we've all seen the studies. It's 75% of people in ICE detention who are slated for deportation right now have not even a parking ticket on their records.
Correct.
Not even
So
a
the
parking
argument
ticket.
that this is about dealing with crime, this is a false argument that continues to be made, and frankly is having true, just horrific results when it comes to our communities, people's willing law enforcement, people willing to cooperate and be part of a larger communal environment, which actually makes our community safer.
Yeah, 100%. No, 100%. Well, thank you for that. And is there anything else? I know you probably have to go. Is there anything final that I've not asked you about that you want to talk to people about? First of all, please, you guys, subscribe. I am Wes Moore, free Substack on Substack. Let's encourage the, lawmakers on Substack. It's pretty cool. So what do you want us with today, Governor Moore?
The thing I'd leave with today is that, when we talk about, everything happening in Washington, I say, listen, we have, the challenge with this White House. I don't not want to spend more time than necessary on is when people are talking about what's the power of the president. I want to talk about what's the power of the people. I want to know what's the power of your governor. What's the power of your attorney general that we have now turned around. And despite what we're seeing from the White House, not only have we sued the White House on a variety of different occasions and beaten the president, by the way, on a variety of different occasions. What we've also shown is what does good governance look like? That when the President of the United States is passing bills that's doing things like making everything more expensive on middle-class folks and working families and giving millionaires and billionaires a tax cut, that in the state of Maryland, what have we done? We actually gave the middle class a tax cut, gave military veterans a tax cut, and turned around and asked wealthy Marylanders and said, yes, I am going to ask you to pay a little bit more to make sure that we can have good public schools and make sure we're not laying off police officers and firefighters. And I will do it unapologetically. That at a time when we are watching the president determining how and going about banning books and banning materials. Well, what did we do in the state of Maryland? I signed legislation banning books. You cannot ban books in my state.
Love that.
That when the president of the United States is sitting and going out to things like reproductive health, that what did we do in the state of Maryland? We actually put reproductive health and reproductive health care in our state's constitution, saying no matter what the Supreme Court says, that in Maryland, we have a safe haven for reproductive rights. So we can talk about the power of the president all day long. The thing I want to focus on is I'm going to show the power of a governor and what we can do and the power of the people to make sure that we are protecting all of us and leaving no one behind in this moment.
That's well said. I tell people all the time, state legislatures, governors, attorneys general, pay attention to those state attorneys general. Hugely important, right? We've got Ken Paxton of what can happen if you don't make the right choice. And then we've got attorneys general all across the country and governors like you work. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I hope you'll come back again.
Sure will.
This has been great. I'm going to send out Governor Moore's Substack. And when I send out the recording to this conversation, which a whole bunch more people will watch. And thank you so much for being here. It's been a really great conversation.
This is awesome. I've loved it. God bless you. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you so much, Governor Moore. Bye-bye. Bye, all. Thank